안녕하십니까. 저는 오늘 사회를 맡은 캐리스의 개보경입니다. 오늘 기조 강연하고 앞에 주제 강연 재밌게 잘 들으셨습니까? 예, 점심도 맛있게 드셨어요. 시간이 조금 짧으신 감이 있으셨죠? 예, 오늘 이 세션은 학습 분석 기술에 대한 세미나를 하는 세션입니다. 저희가 다른 세션과는 다르게 100분 정도의 시간을 길게 할애해서 실제적인 학습 분석을 위한 데이터 수집에 대한 기술들에 대해서 두 가지를 집중적으로 살펴보고자 합니다. 오늘 특별히 이를 위해서 그 IMS 캘리퍼 그리고 XAPI를 설명해 주실 두 분의 연사를 모셨는데요. 지금 사회를 보고 있는 거 보시면 아시겠지만 본 세션에는 동시 통역이 제공되고 있기 때문에 이 세션 100분이 상당히 사실은 긴 시간입니다. 선생님들 혹시 100분 토론 보셨어요? 네, 100분 토론 끝날 때까지 기다리다가 잠드실 때가 굉장히 많으시죠? 지금 점심도 드신 이후고 조금 힘드신 시간이긴 한데 이 100분이 긴 시간이기 때문에 이렇게 말씀드리고 싶은 사항은 저희가 그 심플로우나 여러 가지 지금 그 질의응답을 하실 수 있는 시스템을 마련해 두기도 했습니다만 수시로 그 질문이 있으시거나 뭔가 논의가 필요하신 사항이 있으시면 바로 손을 들어주시면 저희가 마이크로폰을 제공해 드리겠습니다. 마이크를 제공해 드릴 예정인데요. 마이크로 말씀해 주시면 바로 동시 통역이 가능합니다. 그래서 한국어, 영어 가리지 마시고 뭐든지 편하신 언어로 자유롭게 질문을 해주시기 바랍니다. 오늘 첫 번째 강연은 IMS 글로벌 러닝 컨소시엄의 유럽 지역 본부장을 맡고 계신 마커스 길링 본부장님을 모시고 학습 활동 데이터를 수집 교환하기 위한 공통 어휘 및 전송 API에 대한 기술을 소개해 드리도록 하겠습니다. 저희가 이 세션을 계획했을 때 이렇게 몇몇 분들이 말씀하셨어요. 이게 지금 이런 컨퍼런스의 지금 세션 중에 하나를 운영되고 있는 세션이어서 일반인 분들이 많이 오실 텐데 좀 어렵지 않겠는가라는 말씀 많이 주셨는데요. 저희 세션은 지금 워크숍 형태로 진행을 하면서 학습 분석이란 무엇인가라는 개론적인 수준보다는 실제적으로 학습 분석을 하는데 필요한 이런 학습 분석 수집 기술에 대해서 보다 심도 깊게 다루고자 합니다. 그래서 그런 측면에서 조금 어려움이 있으시더라도 이렇게 그 질문 같은 것들 자유롭게 해주시면서 이렇게 심도 깊은 자리가 되었으면 합니다. 그럼 지금부터 첫 번째 세션 발표자를 소개해드리도록 하겠습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Director Marcus Gilling from IMS Global Learning Consortium. Let's give him a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So let's see. People in the back, in the last row, can you hear me right now? Please raise a hand. You cannot, okay. Some more volume in the mic, please. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. If you stop hearing me, please raise your hand again, okay?
Can you give me 1 minute?
Okay.
저희가 심플로우를 통해서 지금 질문하는 것들 마련해 놨는데요. 안내를 미처 못 해드려서 잠깐 안내해 드리겠습니다. 슬라이드가 지금 마련되어 있는 걸로 제가 알고 있는데 우리 기조 강연 세션에 하셨던 것처럼 심플로우 활용해서 지금 해당되는 발표 자료가 아마 뒤에선 잘 안 보이실 수 있을 것 같아요. 그래서 뒷자리에 발표 자료 보이실 수 있도록 오픈이 올려져 있다는 거 미리 말씀을 드리고요. 저희 그 컨퍼런스 홈페이지에 들어가셔도 연사 소개 아래에 그 아래 메뉴에서 발표 자료를 다운로드 받으셔서 함께 살펴보실 수 있습니다. 그리고 질문이 있으신 분은 자리에서 항상 손을 들어주시면 저희가 마이크로폰 드릴 것이기 때문에 자유롭게 질문해 주시기 바라고 혹시라도 그 중간중간 질문하기가 어렵다 싶으신 분들은 심플로우 활용해서 질문을 올려주시면 세션 마지막 정도에 한번 정리를 해서 저희가 질문을 별도로 드리는 시간 갖도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Okay, so thank you, Bokyung, and thank you everybody for inviting me here. So this, as Bokyung said, will be probably quite a long afternoon in the name of learning analytics. After me, Kirsty will speak for another 100 minutes. So this will be very interesting. I think right now this room is nicely cold as compared to the other room this morning, which was not nicely cold. I hope it stays that way, but I can't guarantee it. We'll see what happens. For the interest of both Kirsty and me, I would like to ask first a little bit about you. So let's see. Please raise a hand if you are representing an institution, a school or university, and are engaged in learning analytics in some manner in that school or university. Okay, thank you. Please raise a hand if you are working with a company that develops applications engaging in learning analytics. All right. And now, so there's about 30%, who I don't know what you are or who you are, but I guess we'll have to live with that. All right. So let's see. I've divided this session into 4 parts. One way to put it is that we'll go from a very high-level perspective down to quite a lot of detail about the technology underlying Caliper. The idea is to first take you through a little bit about IMS Global Learning Consortium, my organization, which, as you will learn, does a lot more than analytics in terms of learning technology. So I think it's important to understand the whole context of IT in education, and so I will talk a little bit about what my consortium does and why we're doing it. Then I'll talk a little bit about Caliper as it looks right now, its status, what it does do and what it does not do. I will then talk about the architecture of Caliper, showing a little bit more details of how the logic of this standard works. And finally, I will also talk about what's next for Caliper and learning analytics in IMS Global. And as Bok-Young said, there will be a question and answers session at the end, but please feel free to raise a hand if you have any questions during my talk and interrupt me. There are microphones that will be distributed, I believe, so please do that. All right, so IMS Global Learning Consortium is a non-profit, member-based collaborative. Has existed for about 20 years now, and has the sole focus of improving the learning experience for students, teachers, and administrators. At this point in time, it says 450 here. We are, I think, 480 members today and growing. The members are various kinds of institutions, schools in K-12, universities, government institutions, software development companies, and other kinds of vendors, etc., that all come together to work on standards of various kinds for learning and education. The distribution between our members, a few words about that. So we have members in 22 different countries. However, as the graph on the right shows, 79% of them are currently in the USA. But we do have members also, of course, in Europe and here in Asia. So quickly about the initiatives that IMS Global engages in. There are 5 main branches in our initiatives: digital micro-credentials, learning data and analytics, assessments, learning platforms, apps and tools, and digital curriculum. So first, about digital micro-credentials. This is the idea of building an ecosystem where credentials are distributed digitally in a secure and signed form. So the idea of having each learner having their own wallet or backpack where they collect all their competencies, their course attainments, etc., in digital form that can be verified digitally and shared digitally on the web. That's basically the idea. One of the key specifications, one of IMS Global's standards in this area is a standard called Open Badges. I don't know if you have heard about this before, but it is a quite well-known specification and movement that started actually with Mozilla, the company that does the Firefox browser, to create a way to represent in a badge, meaning something that looks like a digital image, to embed metadata in that badge, in that image, that expresses a credential, an achievement of a learner. And this was about 5 years ago now. The use of open badges has exploded all over the world and is becoming bigger and bigger. Many companies are starting to use badges. Besides schools and institutions, companies are using badges now for internal education purposes. For example, IBM is converting all of their internal trainee programs to be based on open badges. So this is a very exciting area, digital credentials. However, it's not an area that I'm supposed to talk about today, so I'll move on. Learning platforms, apps, and tools. Another of the, I would say, cornerstone, very important standards that IMS has developed is called LTI, Learning Tools Interoperability. This is a tool that, this is a specification that is used to connect platforms and applications with each other in a standardized, interoperable way. So if you think in the classical era of learning platforms, for every new app that you wanted to integrate with, say a new video viewer app or a new assessment app or whatever kind of app, sometimes counting in the hundreds, to integrate that with your learning platform, you had to do custom code, custom operations to achieve the integration. With LTI, we have a language with which the platform and the learning tools can talk to each other and establish a connection, pass data back and forth. And so we have seen for schools and institutions a huge amount of savings in terms of time and cost to integrate new applications into the app roster of the school or institution. So at this moment, we are working on the new version of LTI, version 1.3, also called LTI Advantage. Support is being built for it in the major learning platforms, at least in the West. For example, Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, D2L. I don't know how much these platforms are used here in Korea, but anyway, this new version, LTI 1.3, comes with a number of new improvements, including much better security. It's now close to impossible to hack your way into the transactions. And a number of services as well on top of the basic LTI protocol that I won't go into detail about here. I will provide links in this deck, and it will be shared afterwards, I've been told, so that you can go to the IMS Global website and learn more if you want to. So about assessments, IMS has a standard called QTI, Question and Test Interoperability, which is a way to represent assessments, tests, and the outcomes, the results of the assessments in an interoperable form, so that assessments can be passed and exchanged between different entities. I won't go into more detail about that right now. In terms of curriculum, a couple of other standards, just to mention them briefly. For K-12, we have a standard called OneRoster, which is used to pass information about classes. Which are the members of classes? Which resources do these members have access to? And pass that along from a student information system onto a platform. And thereby, from the school's institution's perspective, you don't have to sign up each individual student with their own account manually, but you can do a bulk registration of students using OneRoster. Similarly, Common Cartridge is one quite popular standard that we have as well, which is used to bundle learning resources, learning objects together with metadata. Right, so that was quickly about some of the standards that IMS are engaged in, together with our 480 members. If you go to imsglobal.org/developers, you will get to a list of these and also many other initiatives that we are engaged in. So, what IMS wants to achieve is interoperability in the learning, digital learning ecosystem. Besides publishing specifications, we are also doing a lot of other things, because one of the things that we've realized over time is that publishing a document and calling it a specification, while a good thing, is not enough to achieve interoperability. Meaning that two applications, a platform or an app, or two apps that need to communicate using this specification may still fail, because no specification is perfect and no implementation is perfect, right? So from an institutional perspective, from the school's perspective, these kinds of headaches where things don't work like it says on the box that they should is something that we want to avoid, and no institution wants to spend time on this. So this is why we are embarking on several other initiatives to improve the interoperability of the applications and of the software. So we're engaging in best practices and guidelines that are published, authored again collaboratively by the 480 members of the consortium. We are providing code libraries and reference implementations. I will show you more about that in the example of Caliper in a few minutes. And fourth, and maybe most importantly, we are also doing what we call certification. So basically, if you are an application provider, a software developer, who's implemented support for one or several of the IMS standards, you can apply to be certified, and you will go through a number of tests that we have put together to challenge your application and take it through an exercise to prove that you support the protocol that's been defined properly. So here's an example screenshot. I don't know if you can't see too much of it, but this is, and on the left side is the menu where you can choose the standard to view certified products for. In this case, it's OneRoster that I mentioned earlier. And then there's a list of the applications that currently have passed the certification tests. So this is a way to try to help schools and universities to build at least an initial set of trust in an application, that it works the way it should. Now, this certification has been a huge success. I think it's been going for about 5 years now, and we have had you can see the graph, right? Of course, you can lie with graphs, but trust me when I tell you it's been several 100% increasing in the amount of applications that are being certified. So this is a very important step, again, towards interoperability, we believe. We are also working very hard all the time to make this even better. Sometimes the certifications, the test suites that we have built have been too simple to pass, which means that in the end, applications still don't work together because we didn't challenge them enough. In other cases, they've been too hard, so that nobody could pass certification, which is also not a very good situation. But we're working on this constantly and trying to make it better. Finally, so we have processes that are established legally, so to speak. We have a formalized process for developing specifications with our members, including votes. We provide intellectual property protection for our members and often also for non-members, meaning that if there's a patent on some kind of technology, we provide as much protection as we can against people who implement that technology. Right, so I mentioned that something like 79%, I think it was, of the members of IMS are American. The other 21% are organizing themselves. So I don't know how many of you know that there is an IMS Korea. Keris is one of the, if not the founding father of IMS Korea. There is an IMS Japan as well, which is based out of Kyoto University. And there is an IMS Europe as well since about a year. So one of the things I do is that I head the European branch of IMS. And so what these organizations, sub-organizations of IMS are trying to do is to help IMS make the specifications work better in our own countries, right? So making a specification that works just as well in any country on Earth, given, as you know, language differences, cultural differences, social, psychological aspects of language. There's just a vast number of reasons why it's difficult to make specifications work across the world. These organizations want to help make that happen, so to provide input to the IMS on how to improve and change the standards so that they work better for us. IMS Europe will be having a meeting in Utrecht in the Netherlands in November. You're all welcome to come. The trip is very long, I'm afraid. I just did it a couple of days ago, but it might just be worth it. One of the things I'm also announcing is quite exciting. So another problem of an international organization is the time difference. So if you have people on the west coast of USA and people in Japan and people in Europe that want to meet at the same time, you're going to have an issue, right? Somebody's going to have to get up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. And so what IMS will start doing in October is that we'll have what we call a tech briefing, which is a webinar about an hour long, I would guess, where any IMS member can show up and talk to the architects of IMS, ask questions, what's going on with the different standards, and also give input to the architects from your country, right? So this will initially be done for Korea and Japan, starting in October. Also, and this I think is primarily, in Japan there's a big effort around LTI, and the LTI Advantage Developer Toolkit, which I won't go into details about if you don't know about it already. It's an open source toolkit to implement LTI, will be localized. And we're also in Japan doing train the trainers programs where we want to develop Japanese experts that can help other schools and institutions to become well-versed in how to implement the standards. And this may be something that could be interesting for IMS Korea as well. All right, so now we're at learning data and analytics, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about. Before we go there, any questions about IMS Korea? All right. Question to the translator, am I speaking too fast? What does he or she say? Am I speaking too fast? Okay? Oh, good. Thank you. All right. So learning analytics. So let me ask you this. How many of you have heard the word caliper before? Please raise a hand. Okay. How many of you have heard the word XAPI before? Please raise a hand. A few more maybe. Okay. Yes, I will talk a little bit about that strange dichotomy as well, and how we hope to fix that moving forward. But first of all, what's the problem? So we already talked about the typical modern digitalized school or university that may have hundreds of apps installed, all connecting to a platform. One of the things that I mentioned that IMS is doing is to provide LTI as a way of setting up the connection and making sure that the context is passed along, right? So this is the user, this is the user's rights, this is, you know, say, a location where the user should be positioned, and so on. But there's a lot of things that LTI does not do regarding what happens next in all these apps, right? So, for example, let's assume the user opens an ebook reader application. Now, there are several parties who are interested in knowing how does the user engage with the book? Does the user engage at all? Are pages being turned? Are annotations being made? Etc., etc., right? And in a deployment or a school ecosystem with hundreds of apps, the number of events, learning events that can occur, of course, are enormous. So the challenge is, in a world of distributed apps, how do we create homogeneous, similar, common data streams that can be interpreted as one thing, right? So the data being generated by all these apps, if it was arbitrary and the apps decided themselves what to send, would be very, very hard, if not impossible, to interpret in a centralized location. So this is why we need learning analytics. Caliper is just one example of a learning analytics specification. But the core problem is that of creating homogeneous data streams that describes the learning events that occur as a user interacts with some entity, typically in the digital realm. So again, interoperability, just what I said. Data interoperability and semantic interoperability. So what do we mean by semantics? What's a good example here? Don't want to get too deep into that one, but let's say that one app claims that the user has achieved an outcome. What does achieving an outcome actually mean? Is it to have performed an arbitrary task, or is it to have performed an actual test, an assessment that generated a result? All of these are arguably semantic issues, right? So there's also a need to have a vocabulary, a common language when you ship the data. You cannot just agree how to ship the data, but you have to agree on the language that describes the data as well. Right? So that's interoperability. Another area for learning analytics is innovation, and I can't tell you how much innovation remains to be done in the area of learning analytics. In fact, when I watch some of the most rich and advanced universities in the USA collecting lots of learning analytics, let me just put it diplomatically and say they have a lot of innovation to do in terms of figuring out what they should do with the data once they've got it, right? So that's like the next thing I believe that's going to happen is that discussion, right? Okay, so now we can collect data, we have ways to do that, we have a shared vocabulary, we have shared semantics. What are we going to do? I'm going to show some examples later of what universities have done, but again, massive amounts of stuff that can be done here. And also, of course, one of the original arguments behind the idea of learning analytics to feed insights, to help institutions, individual teachers, to gather information on a deeper level about what's going on in the classroom, right? Is a student lagging behind? Is somebody in need of more help? Is a certain piece of content, a learning object, say an ebook, too confusing so people don't understand it? Is a certain video object way too much fun so everybody just watches that all day instead of doing other stuff? These are practical insights that learning analytics can help us generate. So the scope of Caliper. This is a simplified graph that shows what a complete learning analytics setup looks like. At the left, you have an instrumented app. When we say instrumented, we mean that it has analytics activated. It's been coded into the application. So what the application can do is to describe what's going on, describe the learning events, again, using the common vocabulary, the common semantics that we discussed. It can collect them, describe them in a serialized physical form, so to speak, and then transport them. It transports them to a store where the data is persisted. And then from that store with persisted data, there is usage. So somebody at the institution or the company or wherever you are is doing analysis, visualization, reporting, sharing, predicting, and maybe also intervening, which is what this lower arrow means, intervene and adapt. That sometimes, as I mentioned before, you can glean that something is not working and therefore go back to the classroom, go back to the app, and the student in some cases, and try another path, another way of getting where you want to be in terms of learning outcomes. So this is the simplified view of the whole picture. Caliper's scope is only the first of these three, right? So Caliper does not define a store. It defines a little bit about what stores must do to receive the data, but not more. And Caliper does not do anything about visualization or analysis or reporting, right? So it's only the first. So the Caliper 1.1 specification is the currently published version of Caliper. There is a previous version called Caliper 1.0, which is now deprecated. You should take care and ensure that you're looking at the 1.1 specification if you're going to read about this, right? Because this is a much improved version of the caliper spec, both in terms of being user-friendly and easy to read, and also in terms of its features. To find it, you can either just Google Caliper 1.1, or you can go to IMS Global's GitHub account, where this specification is also available. And yes. The other big thing, again, I'll get back to this, we also have a certification for Caliper 1.1. This means that there's a test system that we have built that suppliers, software developers, can apply to test against. And if they get certified, if they prove that they support the standard properly, they get certified. They can use our logo on their app if they want. They will appear in our online catalog of certified applications. Let's see. Yeah, let me go back one step. Oh, the picture is too small there. I'll try to see if I can move ahead a little bit. Yeah, let's do it like this. Only that this is broken now. Okay, that looks right. Yes. So the topmost buckets or entities defined in Caliper is what we call profiles. So the idea with the profile is that it captures everything you need to describe a typical learning interaction. Right? So for example, in Caliper 1.1, we have an annotation profile, which gives you everything you need to describe how a user, say, takes a bookmark or adds a note and scribbles something, right? So what do you need to do that? You need a way to represent a location. This may be in an ebook or any other arbitrary place. You need a way to represent the text that was added by the student, which may either be scribbles with e-ink or typed characters, of course. You need the timestamp of when it happened, etc., etc. So there's a number of data fields that each of these profiles include. And again, they provide a semantic vocabulary for this that is static and stable. Another example is the assessment profile for testing, media profile for watching video or listening to audio, reading profile for reading ebooks, and also some what we could call more abstract profiles, like a session profile, which is part of what we call a context, meaning that it describes the start and the end in time of an event that we call a session. In Caliper 1.1, we added a forum profile for activities on forum, a grading profile for getting scores, a tool use profile, which I will talk more about later. Yes, I'm sorry, there's something wrong with my slides here. One of the things in Caliper 1.1 that we also prepared for is the idea of what we call standalone profiles. So At this point, when you look at Caliper 1.1, you will see a number of profiles, I think it's 12, that are shipped with Caliper. And at that point, in January this year, there were no more profiles for Caliper. Everything was shipped in one package. What we're doing right now is that we're creating what we call a standalone profile release scheme, so that we can allow the membership to build new profiles for new types of learning interactions without having to revise the whole specification. Right, so that's one way to try to be more agile and meet the needs for a richer vocabulary quicker. Revising a specification is a very heavy work, takes years, whereas doing a standalone profile release takes less time. So let me now try to go back where I wanted to be. Yes, so examples of the upcoming profiles that we are working on right now is the tool launch profile, which describes a very, very simple thing. It describes that a tool was launched from within a platform. And this may sound very, very simple, and that's exactly what it is, and that's the point of it. The idea is simply to gather statistics from an administrative point of view about which tools are actually used. So if you're a university and you've paid for 100 applications, you want to know which of them are used, right, and how much. And it's about that simple. We believe this will be one of the most popular profiles, actually, because of that. Search profile, I will show that in more detail later as well. It's about the learning activity of performing a search for something. And the QTI profile, which is an advanced assessment profile as well. All right. So a lot or almost everything that IMS is doing with Caliper is open source and available on GitHub in its latest versions. The specification is there. The supporting materials are there, such as the implementation guide. But also a number of software implementations of Caliper. So I'll talk about this more later, but in Caliper we talk about sensors, which are the things that sits in the applications and sense events. We call those Caliper sensors. Sending them to a learning record store or an endpoint. And we have a number of languages. It looks like 6: Java, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, PHP, and .NET implementations of Caliper sensors, all available freely in open source. We also have some sample code repositories, those that end with /example. And also, let's see, in terms of endpoints, there are 2 available endpoint implementations in open source right now. One is called OpenLRW. It's written in Java. And the other one is called Callisto, and it's written in Ruby. So basically, IMS is taking care of the sensor implementations and making them available freely, either just for study or for reuse. Again, we call these reference implementations, which is supposed to mean that they're just there to prove that it can be done and how it could be done, but they're not necessarily something that you can pick into a real application. But it turns out that several of these libraries are used in real applications, including some of the biggest LMSs in the world. So some of them are more than reference implementations, but we don't provide guarantees, so to speak, that they will work flawlessly And if you find a bug in any of these, you will be expected to do a bug report as a start, and we'll be even more happy if you also provide, of course, a patch that fixes the issue. The final open source implementation that came up just a few months ago is from Purdue University in the USA that has made a iOS implementation of a caliper sensor. So this is written in Swift and also available then open source. So there's quite a lot of code to study if you are so inclined. Not everybody is, of course. But there it is. And again, all these links you will be able to revisit once we share the presentation afterwards. All right, so I wanted to show you a little bit about real-world implementation examples of Caliper. Beginning with Unisin. I would guess that not many of you have heard about Unisin before. It is a consortium in the USA consisting of, looks like 12 or so universities, including the University of Michigan, Colorado, Minnesota, Ohio, Penn State, etc., etc. They have come together to share technology with each other, to build a common technology stack, so to speak. And it, of course, does not pertain only to analytics, but it pertains to what platforms they're using, what apps they're using. And of course, when they go through a tender process to buy things, they do that together to get the prices down, etc. So they're a big machine in the US. So they have a common data platform shared between these 12 universities, based on these three key ideas. A common model for all teaching and learning data. That's again this idea of a common vocabulary, of common semantics, right? That underlies everything they do. They have this vocabulary with names for things and metadata that they agree to use whenever they describe something. They have an institutional teaching and learning data platform that integrates the tools, data, and creates a single dynamic view of the learner. And they also collaborate in data products and services, in research, analytics, reporting, and tools. So this is typically how it looks. Remember that graph I showed a bit earlier where I said it's a simplified view of everything with the three boxes in it. This is essentially the same thing that Unisin is doing. They have a platform, an LMS, and a number of tools. All are implementing the sensor, the caliper sensor, and sending events to an endpoint that stores the data. Then there's event processing with data enrichment, time window processing, predictive modeling, etc. That is then stored again and visualized however the institution wants to see it, and reported however the institution wants it reported. So again, quite a big idea, right? To have the same model for 12 of the biggest universities in the US. But it seems to be working, and it's saved them a lot of headaches to come together and work together on this. Although at this point only 4 of them are up and running yet. The other ones are lagging behind, but they're coming there. This autumn, more than 500 million events will have been generated, Caliper events. They are partnering with Canvas and other vendors as well to make this happen. And I wanted to show this as well. These slides I have borrowed from a colleague at Unisin who talked about their Motivations. What do we want to use the data for? Again, the next big problem, right? We have the data, now what should we do with it? And here's what they are setting up as the goals for what they want to do with their analytics data. It's advising, meaning to guide students. It's content and course design, meaning to reap information from how content has been used to help improve it, right? Too difficult part, problematic parts, too simple, etc., whatever. Teaching analytics as well, how to improve the teacher. Learning analytics, meaning student insights into their own behaviors. That's a very interesting perspective that we don't think of too often. How can learning analytics help the student directly without necessarily an intervention? And then finally, one of the holy grails of the world today, adaptive learning, to have tools that are smart enough that they can adapt to the student's level and desires dynamically. Unisin has also developed their own endpoint for Caliper, which at this point is not open source, but we're hoping that maybe we can get there. Another example is Canvas, one of the bigger LMS platforms in the West. I don't know, is Canvas used in South Korea? I don't think so, right? I haven't heard about it. They are migrating their so-called live events to Caliper 1.1 and will be done by the end of this year. This means that all the events that the LMS generates itself will be in Caliper form. And that's actually quite a lot, because the LMS, as you know, sits in the middle, in most architectures, in the middle of the institutional app ecosystem. It knows a lot about what's going on, right? It knows when assignments are created, it knows when courses are created, when assessments are taken. And so having the LMS instrumented as a sensor is a very good thing. And Canvas Live Events before was a proprietary Canvas-only language that already did this. It sent events about what was happening, but it was using its own language. So arguably, the only thing that Instructure, which is the company behind Canvas, has done is to change the vocabulary to one with known standardized semantics, which is those of Caliper in this case. Michigan is using Canvas Live Events, and they're saying that they're peaking on 1.43 million events per day. Again, that's quite a lot. Scary, much, even. Blackboard is another big LMS. I believe there's some use of Blackboard in South Korea, right? The migration to Caliper 1.1 is currently ongoing in Blackboard, so their equivalent of Canvas Live Events is also going to Caliper 1.1 this autumn. One thing to notice, of course, is that when an LMS implements learning analytics, it doesn't support everything, right? It doesn't support all of the vocabulary. It only picks those profiles, as we talked about, that make sense for an LMS to support. I'm listing here some of the things that Blackboard supports right now as of last week. It's assessments, it's sessions, it's view event, meaning simply to describe that a user accessed something to consume it, right? And they also actually have a number of events that are extensions that Caliper does not yet support, like the blog event, or the calculated grade snapshot event. I have no idea what that is. But anyway, those are two LMS implementations of Caliper that are currently ongoing and will be done before the end of this year. Another slightly interesting example, perhaps, a little bit specialized, that's why I wanted to bring it up, is ACT, a company in the US as well. They implemented their own open source learning record store or endpoint called Callisto. And one of the things that ACT does is that they work a lot with LORs, learning object repositories. That's part of their business. So one of the questions they had was, can we use learning analytics and Caliper to rate resource efficacy? Meaning, in our learning object repository, which of the resources are actually good as learning resources? And there's a paper that they've written, or an app note, that's linked here as well. I recommend you read that. Because they set up and trialed this and had actually some success, not perfect success, but they got somewhere with it. Basically a way to keep your learning object repository clean and being able to take away stuff without feeling bad about it. A few other examples. Notre Dame University is using the open source OpenLRW. They're getting events from, for example, Kaltura, which is a video viewer app, and storing that in case you're interested in storing options in a MongoDB Atlas cluster. Another thing that's hot today is to use Amazon AWS and what's called serverless approaches. UC Berkeley in the US is using this approach with what's called Elastic Beanstalk to produce Caliper event streams and then storing them serverlessly in AWS. So that's a few examples. Next up, architecture. Any questions before we go to this section? Right. So let's see, the Caliper model. As will be evident, Caliper and XAPI are actually quite similar. I'm sorry, there we go. So we talked about profiles already, right? Like the assignment profile or the view profile. They are intended to encapsulate everything you need to describe a real-world event. Now, what does a profile contain? That's what I'm going through here now. So let's see. So the profile provides a domain-specific set of terms and concepts that describe common user interactions in a consistent manner using a shared vocabulary. That's just what we said. So basically, when you create a profile in Caliper, what you do is that you make a number of decisions. You decide which events to support, which actors, actions, objects, generated entities and target entities to support, as well as other requirements. So here's the basic layout of an event. This is the basic building block of the profile. So an event describes the relationship established between an actor and an object, formed as a result of a purposeful action undertaken by the actor at a particular moment in time within a given learning context. So this is what we call the triple in both XAPI and Caliper. The actor did something, right? Actor, action, object, or actor, verb, object. The actor did something at a particular event time, which you also describe, always, and within a given context. So the context could be which class you're in, which session you're in, which application you're using, etc., etc. So that's the basic building block, the Caliper event. Now this looks a little strange. There's a font issue here. But the Caliper event then has a number of properties, which you can think about as attributes. that you put on the event to describe it. I think I have an example here. I apologize. The search event. So this is all the search event does. The actor, which in this case is a person, searched, which is the action, a digital resource, which is the object. So it could be typically an ebook, but also it could be the web, right? It could be searching Google. At a particular time. So that's the basic idea of the event. Now there's also what we call generated and target properties. So you always want to describe more, right? So in terms of generated, or wait, let's do it the other way. In terms of the target property, in this case, is what was the query? What did the user actually type? And the generated property is what was the result? What did the query actually return? So those are, shall we say, things that we tag onto. And XAPI does this as well, right? Tag onto the basic triple because it's not enough to describe everything we want, right? So context is always present. There's always contextual and more information that we want to be able to add. So this is how the event works. The other thing in Calibre is what we call the entity, a thing. It represents objects that participate in learning-related activities, right? So we have a number of entity subtypes defined to better describe, for example, people, groups, organizations, content, courses, software applications, and other objects that constitute the stuff of a Calibre event. They all have also properties, and we have what we call an inheritance chain of entities. You probably can't see that here, and I don't believe there are extra screens, but we have agent, which include person, organization, group, course offering, course section, and software application. We have the attempt entity, when the user tries to do something, wants to do something. The annotation entity, which includes bookmarks, highlights, sharing, and tagging. We have the learning objective entity, the digital resource entity, which probably is one of the more easiest ones to understand, right? The media object like audio and video, a document, an ebook, a chapter, a web page, digital resource. We have membership entities, response entities, typically generated as part of an attempt, right? The user tries to do something and generates a response. This is used also for assignments, so there are subtypes for that, for example, for filling in blanks, multiple choice, and the typical digital types of assignments tests you have. So let's look, now that we know about the event and the entity, let's look at an entire profile. So this is the media profile. And again, there's some font issues. But basically, so again, when you create a profile, you collect everything you need to capture a specific activity domain. And in this case, it's a learner, or basically a person. This could be a teacher as well, engaging with a media object. So what do we need? Well, we need the person entity. We need the media object entity, right, which is audio, image, or video. We need a location in the media as well. So those are the two entities. And what events do we need? Well, we need the view event that I mentioned. The user accesses something to view it, to consume it. We need the navigation event to describe the user moved or navigated to, say, a fragment within the object. And then we need also the media event. And all the properties of the media event are listed here. I won't read them all out to you, but they are what you expect, right? Something happens to a media object. What is it? What did the user trigger, right? Start, playback, end playback, change size, change speed, change volume, jump, mute, unmute, etc., etc. All the typical actions you can do with a media object are supported in the vocabulary. So this is the Caliper media profile. This is what we give you, like in a bag, and say, okay, if you want to describe a media event, you should have what you need in here. Of course, you don't always, right? And we have extensions to support that. In addition, the Caliper media object has a number of attributes. Besides just being a video, right, or an audio file with a beginning and an end, we have fields in here to provide the name, a description, typical, bibliographical metadata like creators, keywords for searching, learning objectives, date created, etc., etc. So the media object also has these attributes, properties that you can use. All right, a little bit about Caliper and linked data. So I also already talked about the basic triple, right? User did something, actor, verb, object. User viewed video. User attempted to take assignment. These are the typical triples. Caliper uses the linked data paradigm. How many have heard about linked data here before? Please raise a hand. There's one very well-educated woman in the back there. Great. So, how many have heard about JSON? Right, that's many of you. You may know that there's a dialect of JSON called JSON LD. The LD there stands for linked data. And it's basically a way of enhancing JSON to be more semantically correct. What it does is basically provide a way for you to provide qualified names for everything that you reference. For those of you who know JSON, you know it's a simple key value pair thing, right? Time, colon, and then a time stamp. The problem with JSON from a correctness and a longevity and a vocabulary perspective is that these small terms can be misinterpreted if you don't know where they come from, right? What means time for me in my JSON and what means time for you in your JSON might be two different things. So what we do with linked data is to provide a way of qualifying. When I say time, I mean exactly this. And that's by hiding a full URL, IRI, behind the word. You don't see it when you look at JSON, but it's encoded in there, so to speak. And that URL leads back to the Caliper, in this case, Caliper vocabulary. So if you follow that URL, you will get to the definition exactly what we mean with this term. So Caliper uses JSON LD. We are also providing what we call this ontology then. So if you follow these terms to their home, you will get their definition. JSON LD is not popular everywhere. Some people love it because of its correctness and because of its capability to be unambiguous about what you're trying to say. Other people think that it's annoying and that it's a waste of time. And it basically depends. In the West, we have this term script kiddies. I don't know what, you probably have a similar term here in Korean, meaning very young people that write web applications very quickly and don't care about what the elders say, right? Those are the people that don't like JSON-LD very much. And unfortunately, we need them. So what we've done is try to make JSON-LD awareness optional, meaning that you can consume Caliper as regular JSON. Only if you really want to can you open up this LD part of it and study that more deeply, so to speak. There's a really good primer about JSON-LD. If you just Google JSON-LD space primer, you'll get to this URL at jasonld.org/primer/latest, if you're interested. So yes, triples. Caliper and XAPI, as I already mentioned, have some startling similarities. We have the actor action object in Caliper, and XAPI has the same thing. It just happens to call the action for a verb instead, but it's the same basic idea, right? An event in Caliper is a statement in XAPI, and it contains this basic triple. And then at the right side, as I already mentioned, all this additional stuff that we want to provide along with the triple to contextualize it. There's variations between Caliper and XAPI at this point, right? But at least the fundamental idea of what a learning event actually is shared between Caliper and XAPI, which I think is good news because it means that we can work on convergence moving forward. So, all right, I'm just checking for time here. I've spoken for 70 minutes, 7-0 already. Good Lord. 30 minutes left. Okay, thank you. So you have this application. It's a video app or a test app or whatever you have. It's being deployed at an institution or in a school, and it's starting to send Caliper events. How does it do that? So one of the other things, of course, that Caliper does is to provide what we call the sensor API, which is an HTTP-based API that says how to send the packets of JSON-LD over to the endpoint, right? Very simple. It's HTTPS TLS 1.2 with access tokens. So there's a security model there as well. And this is, at this point, a very, very simple API to send events. It's basically just post. And if the endpoint who receives the event does not understand it or finds an error in it, we specify some of the return codes for the post call, right? But that's basically it. It's very, very basic at this point. Caliper does not provide an API for querying a data store, an endpoint, right? So once you've stored all this stuff in one central location, you want to pull it out. At this point, Caliper does not define an API for that. There are proposals for doing it. We know that XAPI has been working on it, so we're trying to figure out what the best way forward is. We want to move slowly in this regard to make sure that we get things right. The other thing then, which is also a very important thing in terms of sending things, so you have this very simple HTTP post setup, is what we call the envelope. You can read about this in the Caliper 1.1 specification as well. So we saw several times how there are millions of events per day right, being generated already as we speak. One of the problems, of course, is throughput and noise. It's a lot of stuff. So what Caliper allows to do is to group several events together in an envelope and send them in a batch, right? So the application can store events for a certain period of time and say maybe once every 10 minutes, send an envelope with multiple events in it over the wire. So this is a batch mode that turns out to be used more or less by everyone at this point. It's very, very popular. All right, let's see, anything more about the API? I don't think so, unless there are API-related questions or... Okay. Caliper future and next steps. So yes, we're working on Caliper 1.2 at this point. It's expected to be completed next year in spring. Caliper 1.1 is our current recommendation to implement. Caliper 1.2 will not radically change any of the APIs or other basic constructs. Caliper will basically only be additive. So it will refine the endpoint behaviors a little bit and provide certification for them. It will provide additional semantic profiles. I mentioned those earlier, the ones that we are developing standalone. And it will also describe how to integrate Caliper with LTI. So those are basically the things that we are doing. And again, the way things work now is that we are developing profiles in between the main releases of the specification. And why is this not working? And so upcoming profiles are manifold. We have more proposals than we can handle from institutions and vendors that want to see more semantic richness added to Caliper. This is perfectly understandable. Caliper is a very young specification. Its language, its vocabulary is also young and small, so it needs to grow. So our problem is to find a balance so that we don't grow too fast and make mistakes that we will have to live with forever. But again, some of the ideas that are being worked on as we speak now, I mentioned the tool launch profile, right? The very simple one that only describes that a platform launched a tool. The search profile for a user conducting a search. The QTI profile for advanced assessments events, a survey profile for describing a survey being taken, feedback profile for describing somebody giving feedback to somebody else, a mastery profile which is related to digital credentials and achievements, to be able to describe when a user reaches certain thresholds of knowledge predefined, one of which, or the top of which, would be mastery. A badging profile, again, I talked about open badges earlier. This is to describe badge-related events. A user receives a badge, a user shares a badge, a user looks at somebody else's badge, etc., and so on. So this is work that's ongoing all the time. The Caliper Working Group in IMS consists of about 20, I think, active members from vendors and institutions, primarily universities, who meets once a week for an hour and works in between those meetings, basically day and night on this. And so, of course, here in Korea, if you have ideas for new profiles that you would need here, we're very interested in hearing about that. All right. So I talked about Caliper and XAPI, and one of the questions we always get, or at least I always get, is why, oh why, as we say? Are there two specifications that look almost the same and does almost the same thing with some variations? And I guess the answer to why it came to this point initially is I actually don't know, because I wasn't around at the time. But I can tell you that IMS is ramping up, increasing our efforts to put, so to speak, an end to this, or at least alleviate the problems this creates over the coming years. So basically the idea is to align somehow, and as always, a problem like this with two standards bodies, it's not the first time in history that there are these, shall we say, competing standards, although I don't think it's really true that they're competing, but at least they're doing almost the same thing, right? The last thing you want to do is to create another standard, because then you have three things that does the same thing. But we want to align them and harmonize them. Our idea is to try to find patterns to enable them to coexist. So again, if you think about this application ecosystem in a school with hundreds of apps, one of the ways that we could approach this is to think that harmonization means that 50% of those apps could be XAPI and 50% could be Caliper. For the receiver, for the endpoint, it shouldn't really matter in the end. It should be able to receive both. And again, vocabulary and semantically, it should be able to normalize what it receives into one representation as well, right? So that's one of the ideas we're working on. The way, at least this is what I try to tell my bosses when we talk about this, is that content is king. The data that's created, the events that are being described, the vocabulary used to describe them, that's what really matters. How you describe them, whether it's JSON LD or XML or whatever, that's not that important. How you ship them, what you're using to take them from point A to B, that's not really important either, if you look at the big perspective, right? So these things come and go, but the data created needs to live for a very, very long time. We know of researchers, right, that want to look back, say, 10, 20 years to make longitudinal studies. We have to ensure that the data can live and be consistent over enormous, long periods of time. And so that's why content is king, and that's why we're at IMS probably are going to focus more on that idea of a good ontology, a good vocabulary, good profiles, and then say that it's basically up to you as a user to decide whether to use Caliper or XAPI for that, right? We'll see. There's a lot of work remaining, but at least we realize that this helps nobody. It's doing no good, and it's just another consequence of politics and culture and other things that sometimes doesn't work as well as it should. But over the coming years, I think we're going to see the harmonization between Caliper and XAPI happen. And again, beyond vocabulary, there's many facets, right? There's the security protocols used, the transport protocols, the APIs used, and so on. Lots of stuff that needs to be fixed. But again, for us, those things aren't as important as the data itself. That's what we really want to help our members get right, is to describe the data in a correct way and a way that we can guarantee will be able to be consumed maybe 20 years from now. All right, so let's see. According to my clock, I've spoken for 81 minutes, 82 minutes, which would leave like 8 minutes for questions. We said 90 minutes, right? So, yes, questions.
네, 혹시 플로어에서 질문 주실 분 있으십니까? 네, 마이크 부탁드립니다.
예, 오늘 발표 잘 들었습니다. 예, 제가 관심 있는 분야는 이제 미디어 쪽이라서 예, 아까 설명해 주신 미디어 프로파일 쪽에 대해서 좀 질문을 드리고 싶습니다. 저희 회사에서 또 준비하는 부분이 있어서 그런데 혹시 그 미디어 프로파일 중에 인터랙티브 비디오나 360 비디오와 관련된 프로파일에 대해서 지금 혹시 준비를 하고 계신지 아니면 곧 그런 뭐
Okay. Very good question. Let me go back to that slide. Yeah, so interactive video and 360 video. So yes, basically at this point we have a number of media companies helping us. So for example, Kaltura, that you may know, helped us build this. But at this point, there's nobody at the table who are, so to speak, pushing for the use cases of interactive or 360. What would happen? Let's say that you came to the table and said, hey guys, we need this and this and that. These 3 new things we need in order to realize our use case, right? Come to the working group, say that. What would probably happen is that the media profile itself would be extended to add 3 new things. Could be, right? A new type of media object, new types of media events, whatever they may be. I'm not really into 360. But these profiles are made to be extended over time, right? They're not fixed. But as new use cases arrive, we can extend these things. And I should mention as well that, of course, many of these properties are optional, right? So when you create one of these events, you don't have to specify everything. And so in that case, the properties, the metadata or attributes that you would need would probably be optional, right? Because not everybody is using those particular new features. But that would be the evolutionary path that would be the most probable one to happen, is A, somebody shows up at the table and describes their requirements. B, the working group figures out how to describe that in the existing model. If it doesn't work, then there would be a new profile, right, called interactive video profile or something. But my guess would be it will work to extend this. Now, also, the other thing to remember is extensions. I didn't talk about that, but every Caliper thing, the events and the entities are extensible, which means that you, if you have additional data that you want to provide, can do that in an extension field. So you can provide your own metadata as well. There's like a little field in each of these called extensions. a JSON object, basically, and you can put whatever you want in there. And that's actually used a lot today. If we look at Blackboard and Canvas, for example, the LMS events, there are lots of extensions in there. And the simple reason is, again, that Caliper is a young language and it's not very rich yet. So you always find more things you want. So for interactive video or 360, in theory, you could use the media profile today, as it looks here, and add your own extensions to it today. At the same time, you should, as you do that, you should also talk to the Caliper working group and say, look, I'm using these extensions. Don't you think you want to bless them and take them into the core vocabulary? At which point we would probably say, yes, we want to do that. Does that answer your question?
네, 그 심플로우를 통해서 3가지 정도의 카테고리에서 질문이 있습니다. 그래서 그 3질문을 조금 총괄해서 답변 드릴 수 있도록 드리도록 하겠습니다. 예, 첫 번째 질문은 네, 한국에서 인공지능을 활용한 학습 분석 서비스들이 많이 생겨나고 있습니다. 이러한 서비스들은 대부분 표준을 적용하기보다는 자체적인 기술로 개발을 하고 있는데 표준이 적용되지 않고 자체 개발에 대해서는 어떻게 생각하시는지에 대한 의견을 여쭤보고요. 연관된 질문으로 대부분 한국에 있는 중소규모의 에듀텍 업체들은 IMS 표준을 적용하게 될 때 얻을 수 있는 장점이 무엇이 있을지 궁금하다는 질문 주셨습니다. 특히 글로벌 마켓에 진출하지 않는 작은 규모의 솔루션들도 IMS 표준을 적용했을 때 장점을 가질 수 있을지에 대한 답변을 요청드립니다.
Okay, so the last question first. Small companies benefiting from standards. Well, it depends who you are selling your product to. In the US and in Europe, what's happening is that the typical customer is a school or a university, right? And those schools and universities, as they're getting digitalized, realize that they cannot have proprietary protocols from each application going out and coming back. It's just too much to handle for them. The only thing that appears is noise in the end. They have to have common protocols and common languages, not just for analytics, but for such a thing as LTI, right? When you launch an application and pass credentials and the identity of the user and the course context. They have to have that common language from the school university point of view in order to be able to afford going digital at all, right? So what's happening in the US and in Europe right now is that when schools go to tender process, meaning schools put out a bid to buy things, in that bid, they specify which standards you must support. And if you don't support these standards, you can't bid. So in those cases, as a small company, right, in the US or Europe, you have no choice. If you want to bid on this tender, you have to prove that you support the standard. So if that's occurs here as well, I think it's going to happen naturally that standards become basically a requirement from the customer. If you don't have that requirement from the customer as a small company, I can fully understand that implementing a standard for a customer that doesn't care or won't use it is a waste of time. I understand that. And from that perspective, well, if you're only selling your product domestically to such, I would assume then very small schools that don't yet have realized that they have a digital problem, then that's fine. But if you want to go international, you're going to run into the requirement for standards more or less directly, right, in Europe and in the US. And if you want to approach larger, and I'm just guessing now, but I would assume that larger Korean universities and schools eventually will have these requirements for standards as well. So that was the second. What's the first question? I've already forgotten.
네. 첫 번째 질문은 이제 한국에서 인공지능 기반으로 많은 학습 분석 서비스들이 개발되고 있는데 그냥 자체 개발하는 것에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시느냐, 표준을 적용하지 않고. 그래서 같은 맥락의 질문이었습니다. 그래서 혹시 추가적인 첨언이 있으시면 말씀 주시고, 혹시 더 추가적인 말씀 없으시면 다음 질문으로 넘어가도록 하겠습니다.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add regarding AI-based. I guess it's the same fundamental question, right?
네.
The complexity of the service, the complexity of what you are describing is, of course, a big factor here. So again, Caliper is young. It has a quite small vocabulary that's growing steadily. We're trying to grow it not fast, because we know we'll be making mistakes if we do, but slowly and securely we want to grow the vocabulary. And if you're describing something very complicated, a user performing a very complicated operation, you will have to use a lot of extensions in the case of Caliper right now to provide all of that data, because Caliper will be insufficient at this point. It's the same case as we had with the interactive video, right? Use extensions and then talk to the maintainers of the vocabulary about supporting it properly. That would be my recommendation.
네, 다음 질문 드리겠습니다. 캘리퍼 어세스먼트 프로파일을 사용하는 것과 QTI를 사용하는 것과의 차이는 무엇인지에 대한 질문 주셨습니다.
Yes. Let's see. So QTI is an IMS specification for describing assessments and the outcomes of assessments. It's a very wide-reaching, rich standard. It's extremely rich. Actually, if you print it out, it's more than 2,000 pages long, somebody told me. I didn't print it myself. And it's used primarily by the so-called assessment engine providers. For example, Pearson is using it, a big publisher, a lot. On the other hand, there's also other types of assessments that are not described using QTI, simpler forms of assessments. Just like a simple fill-in-the-blank problem or something that you don't need all of QTI for. So one way of describing the difference between the QTI profile and the assessment profile is that the assessment profile is for the simpler cases that don't use QTI, and the QTI profile is for when you use QTI. So for anybody who doesn't use QTI, you would probably be best served to use the assessment profile. In the future, we may merge these somehow. We haven't decided yet. At this point, they will be two separate profiles as it looks. But yes, one is very comprehensive and rich, and the other is more basic and simple. So it's basically up to you which one to pick.
네, 캘리퍼의 향후 발전 방안과 관련한 질문입니다. 지금까지 데이터 수집 범위에서의 지금 캘리퍼를 설명해 주셨는데 추후에 분석, 시각화 범위까지 확장해서 개발할 계획이 있으신지 궁금하고요. XAPI와의 조화를 위해서 뭔가 후속적인 후속 과제가 있으신지 궁금합니다.
So about visualization, we're doing a couple of pilots, I think you call them that, pilots or example visualizations using Caliper data right now. But generally, the answer is no. We want to leave it up to the marketplace to drive the visualization and reporting workflows and products forward. To the extent that a standard is needed on that end to facilitate that, we might participate in such a standard, but we would never go into, providing products or dictating ways of reporting or ways of visualizing. That's totally up to the marketplace and to the different vendors to basically create the best products they can given the data they have. Well, one of the things that Caliper does not have, again, which is a weakness here, arguably, is that it doesn't have a standard for querying a learning record store for data, right? So if you have a visualization tool and an endpoint, the API between those two will not be described by an IMS standard at this point, right? I believe that XAPI may have such query things. Yeah, right. Somebody told me it wasn't used much. But yes, so maybe there's a little bit of standard there. But again, remember, IMS is, we only provide standards that our members use to create products or that our members use to help them decide which products to buy if the member is a university. We don't create products ourselves. We just help our members making better products based on standards.
네. 플로어에서 더 질문이 있으신 분들은 이제 시간이 저희가 거의 다 소요된 관계로 그 개별적으로 저희가 커피 브레이크를 지금 20분간 계획하고 있습니다. 그 시간에 개별 스피커들께 질문해 주시기를 부탁드리고요. 추가적으로 사실 심플로우에도 몇 가지의 그 질문들이 있습니다만 그 커피 브레이크 시간을 같이 활용해서 질문을 좀 해주시기를 부탁 말씀드리겠습니다. 지금까지 장장 100분간에 거쳐서 좋은 강의해 주신 닥터 마커스에게 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you.